Ethan woke to the unmistakable sound of metal clanking, voices chattering, and the distant hum of music. His eyes, still heavy with sleep, blinked at the early morning sunlight filtering through his blinds. Something felt off. He sat up, stretched, and then, bam! A sharp burst of laughter echoed from outside, followed by the unmistakable crash of something heavy hitting the ground. His stomach sank. He shoved the blankets off, swung his legs over the bed, and hurried to the window. What he saw made his blood pressure spike. His yard, his meticulously kept, perfectly edged, freshly mowed lawn, had been completely taken over. Tents, tables, and decorations sprawled across it like some deranged wedding reception had detonated overnight. A massive buffet station was set up near his driveway, steam rising from stainless steel trays loaded with food. A banner stretched across his front porch, declaring in bold, tacky lettering, "Welcome to the Maplewood Estates HOA Social." And there, standing at the center of it all, was Karen. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched atop her overprocessed blonde bob, she stood with the posture of a queen surveying her domain. Her voice rang out, sharp and commanding as she barked orders to a group of frazzled volunteers, who scrambled to arrange chairs and adjust tablecloths under her watchful gaze. Ethan rubbed his eyes. Maybe he was still dreaming. Maybe, if he turned around and climbed back into bed, he would wake up, and none of this would be real. But the scent of overpriced catering and the sight of Karen smirking at a tray of miniature quiches told him otherwise. This was real. This was happening. And it was happening on his damn lawn. Before he could stop himself, he yanked open his window. What the hell is going on? Karen turned, flashing him a wide, infuriatingly smug smile. "Good morning, neighbor," she called, waving her clipboard like some twisted royal scepter. "Beautiful day for a community gathering, don't you think?" Ethan's jaw clenched. He hated that tone, the fake cheerfulness laced with barely concealed glee, the way she relished his anger. He didn't even bother putting on proper shoes. Slippers would do. He stomped down the stairs, yanked open his front door, and stormed outside, his heart hammering in his chest. "Karen," he said, voice tight with barely restrained fury, "what the hell are you doing on my property?" Karen exhaled dramatically, as if this was the most exhausting and predictable question in the world. "Oh, this," she gestured grandly at the monstrosity that had overtaken his lawn. "It's the annual Maplewood Estates HOA Social. Didn't you read the notice?" Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You mean the flimsy piece of paper you stuffed under my doormat sometime last night?" Karen let out a condescending laugh. "Well, that's hardly my fault if you don't check your mail." Ethan's fists curled at his sides. "You can't just hold a party on my lawn." Karen's lips pursed in a mockery of sympathy. "Oh, Ethan," she sighed, flipping through her clipboard with exaggerated patience. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. According to HOA bylaws, unused lawn space can be designated for community events if deemed suitable by the HOA president." She snapped the clipboard shut and gave him a sickeningly sweet smile. "I deemed it suitable." Ethan's eye twitched. "You've got to be kidding me." Karen shrugged. "Relax. It's just a little gathering. It'll be fun. Besides," she added, her voice dipping into that patronizing, sing-song tone that made his skin crawl, "since you never show up to HOA meetings, I figured this would help you feel included." Ethan took a deep breath through his nose. He had lived here for 3 years. 3 long years of pointless fines, ridiculous rules, and Karen's constant, unrelenting control over the neighborhood. She had already slapped him with an absurd violation for having a black mailbox instead of regulation gray and another for leaving his trash bins out 15 minutes past the approved pickup time. But this? This was a declaration of war. Ethan's gaze flicked over the tables groaning under overpriced catering, the towering speakers blaring instrumental jazz, the absurdly oversized banner hanging across his porch like a mockery of personal property rights. Karen's little HOA empire had taken many victims in the past, but if she thought he was going to roll over and let her throw a party on his own damn lawn, she was sorely mistaken. His mind raced. He had two options: stand there and fume while she basked in her self-importance, or... A slow, devilish grin spread across his face. It was time to remind Karen that he was not to be messed with. Ethan stalked back inside, his hands still shaking with rage. His blood pounded in his ears as he paced the living room, stealing furious glances through the blinds. Outside, Karen held court, laughing with her guests, sipping from a glass of wine as if she were the undisputed queen of Maplewood Estates. Volunteers buzzed around her like worker bees, setting up the last of the decorations, adjusting flower arrangements, and arranging chairs, all on his lawn, like it belonged to her. His fists clenched. She was enjoying this. She wanted him to feel powerless. She wanted the neighborhood to see that she controlled everything, even someone else's private property. Oh, she was going to regret this. That's when his gaze flickered to the small digital panel on the wall by the kitchen, the control panel for his high-powered, fully customizable sprinkler system. A slow, wicked grin curled at the corner of his lips. Karen thought she had all the power. She was about to learn otherwise. Ethan grabbed his phone and opened the sprinkler app, his fingers flying across the screen. The system allowed him to schedule watering cycles for specific times, zones, and pressure levels. Within seconds, he had every sprinkler head on his front lawn programmed to maximum output, set to activate at exactly 2:15 p.m. Just in time for Karen's big speech. He set his phone down, exhaled slowly, and rolled his shoulders. Then, with the casual air of a man completely unbothered, he poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and stepped out onto the porch, feigning indifference as the party unfolded. Karen noticed him almost immediately. She turned, her grin stretching wider as she sauntered over. "Decided to join the fun after all?" she asked, her voice practically dripping with condescension. Ethan sipped his coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough for her to notice his calm, unreadable expression. "Enjoy your event, Karen," he said smoothly. She blinked, likely thrown off by his lack of resistance. Then, flipping her clipboard shut with a satisfied nod, she pivoted back toward her guests, lifting her arms in a grand, exaggerated motion to call for their attention. "Everyone, may I have your attention, please?" The murmur of conversation died down. Wine glasses were set aside. Neighbors turned, some smiling, some politely feigning interest. Karen beamed. "I just want to take a moment to celebrate our wonderful community. Here in Maplewood Estates, we pride ourselves on our shared values, our commitment to keeping our neighborhood pristine, and P.S. The first geyser of water exploded into the air. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. The force of the high-pressure sprinklers sent shimmering arcs of water shooting across the lawn, drenching everything, and everyone, in their path. Karen let out a strangled shriek as a jet of ice-cold water hit her square in the face, knocking the microphone from her grip. A second later, total chaos erupted. Guests screamed and scrambled for cover, wine glasses slipped from hands, and catering trays were upended as people tripped over each other in their frantic attempt to escape the onslaught. The buffet table took a direct hit, its carefully arranged platters of food soaked and ruined in an instant. The towering chocolate fountain sputtered and died, its melted contents mixing into a grotesque, sludgy puddle on the grass. The speakers crackled ominously before short-circuiting entirely, letting out a sad, pathetic bzzzt before going silent. Karen stood frozen in place, her perfectly styled blonde bob now plastered to her skull, strands clinging limply to her outraged, purple-faced expression. Her floral dress clung to her in a wet, wrinkled mess, her makeup streaking down her cheeks in dramatic, dripping lines. From his perch on the porch, Ethan couldn't hold back his grin. "Oh no," he called out, barely suppressing his laughter, "I didn't realize the sprinklers were on a cycle. You know, lawn maintenance and all." Karen whipped toward him, sputtering, water streaming from her nose. "Turn it off," she shrieked. "I can't," Ethan said, shrugging, as if he were just as much a victim of this as she was. "It's an automatic cycle. Can't interrupt lawn care, right? You wouldn't want to break your own rules." Karen let out a guttural scream, stomping toward the control panel mounted by the side of the house, only for another powerful jet of water to blast her directly in the back, sending her stumbling forward. A few neighbors, ones who had been on the receiving end of Karen's tyrannical HOA fines, burst into laughter. Karen's eyes blazed with fury as she whipped around, panting, her entire body shaking. You will pay for this," she snarled, her voice raw with humiliation. Ethan tilted his head, smiling with infuriating politeness. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, Karen, according to HOA regulations, automatic watering systems are considered essential maintenance." He paused, letting the realization sink in. "So, really? I'm just following the rules." Karen looked like she was about to explode. But before she could form a response, a chair toppled over nearby, knocking over what remained of the drink station. A cascade of red wine splashed across the grass, soaking the legs of several unfortunate guests. One by one, the partygoers realized there was no salvaging this disaster. The Maplewood Estates HOA social was officially ruined. Neighbors, now drenched and miserable, began trudging toward their cars, muttering complaints. The remaining volunteers, realizing they were fighting a losing battle, began hurriedly dismantling what they could of the event, shoving decorations into plastic bins and collapsing tables as fast as possible. Karen stood there, panting, fists clenched at her sides, soaking wet and defeated. But Ethan could see it in her eyes. This wasn't over. She would never let this go. And honestly, that was just fine with him. The morning after the sprinkler incident, Ethan awoke feeling victorious. For the first time in a long time, he had put Karen in her place. The memory of her standing there, soaked, seething, utterly humiliated, played in his mind like a highlight reel, bringing a smug smile to his face. That satisfaction lasted until he opened his front door. A bright yellow HOA violation notice was taped right in the center, aggressively plastered across the wood like a declaration of war. Ethan ripped it off and scanned the contents. His jaw clenched as he read through the ridiculous list of infractions. Porch light too bright, violation of HOA aesthetic standards. Flower beds contain unsanctioned decorative stones, potential hazard. Mailbox, though repainted to meet HOA standards, now deemed offensive in tone. Fine amount, $250. Ethan let out a sharp laugh. She was already retaliating. Balling up the notice, he tossed it directly into the trash can inside, not giving Karen the satisfaction of a response. But that was his mistake. Ignoring Karen wouldn't make her go away. The next morning, he woke up to find his trash bins knocked over, garbage strewn across his driveway. The day after that, his car was issued a parking violation for being too close to the curb by half an inch. The morning after, a city inspector showed up at his door, clipboard in hand. "Sir, we received an anonymous complaint regarding your property," the man said, adjusting his glasses as he flipped through papers. Ethan crossed his arms. "Let me guess. Something about my lawn being an eyesore or attracting pests?" The inspector looked mildly surprised. Yeah, excessive foliage, supposedly causing a rodent issue." But looking at it now, he glanced around, taking in Ethan's neatly trimmed hedges and well-maintained lawn. "I don't really see a problem." Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose, forcing down his growing frustration. He knew exactly who had filed the bogus complaint. After a brief, unnecessary inspection, the officer left, apologetic but obligated to follow up. But Karen wasn't done. The final straw came when animal control showed up at his house. "We received a report that your dog is aggressive," the officer explained, his expression neutral as he flipped open a notepad. Ethan's heart dropped. "Buddy? He's literally asleep inside right now." "Still, we're required to investigate," the officer said. Neighbors reported excessive barking and a potential biting incident. Ethan clenched his jaw so tightly it ached. There was no doubt in his mind, Karen had escalated to trying to take his dog away. After a frustrating back and forth, the officer eventually left without taking Buddy, but only under the condition that Ethan schedule an official temperament test. That was it. Karen had crossed a line. Ignoring her wasn't an option anymore. If she wanted a war, he was going to give her one. Ethan spent the next 2 nights poring over HOA bylaws, searching for any loophole that would shut Karen down. But as he read through the dense, headache-inducing legal jargon, he realized something. Karen knew these rules inside and out. In fact, she had personally written half of them. There was nothing in the HOA guidelines that could immediately stop her. But there was something else. A curious little clause about HOA financial records. According to HOA bylaws, all community spending had to be transparent and accessible to homeowners upon request. That gave Ethan an idea. The next day, he paid a visit to Maggie, one of the few longtime residents who wasn't afraid of Karen. Over a cup of coffee in her cozy, cluttered kitchen, Ethan laid out his plan. "I want to take a look at the HOA's financial records," he said. Maggie's eyes narrowed. "What are you looking for?" "I don't know yet," Ethan admitted. "But something tells me Karen's been using HOA funds for more than just community improvements." Maggie nodded slowly, then reached for a worn, leather-bound binder on the shelf. "Funny you ask," she said. "A few months back, I noticed some suspicious charges." Ethan leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "How suspicious?" Maggie sighed, flipping through old reports. "Big withdrawals labeled as landscaping improvements. But when I asked around, no one could actually point out what had been improved." Ethan's grip tightened on his coffee mug. Maggie lowered her voice. "Word is, Karen's been skimming money for years." That was all he needed to hear. Over the next few days, Ethan dug deep. With Maggie's help, he gathered past HOA reports, bank statements, and records that some of the more disgruntled neighbors had quietly saved. And what he found was worse than he ever expected. Karen wasn't just an overbearing control freak, she was a fraud. The records exposed a pattern of grossly misused HOA funds. Thousands of dollars spent on luxury spa treatments. Gift cards, high-end shopping sprees, all labeled under community development. Multiple payments to her cousin's so-called landscaping company for work that had never actually been done. And then there was the kicker. A $5,000 expense labeled legal consultation. With a bit more digging, Ethan figured out exactly what that meant. Karen had been sued by a former homeowner months ago, someone she had tried to kick out of the neighborhood using the same tactics she was using against him. Instead of paying for her legal fees herself, she had quietly used HOA money to settle the lawsuit. Ethan sat back, staring at the evidence spread across the table. He had just found the smoking gun. Now, all he had to do was use it. Ethan arrived at the HOA meeting early, binder in hand, every page meticulously organized with damning evidence. The room buzzed with the usual neighborhood chatter, the kind of idle small talk people made before the real business started. He scanned the room, noting the usual attendees, some loyal Karen supporters, some frustrated homeowners who had endured years of her tyrannical rule, and a few neutral faces who just wanted to get through the meeting without drama. And then, there was Karen. She walked in like she owned the place, chin high, her signature clipboard tucked under her arm like a prized weapon. The moment her eyes locked onto Ethan, a slow, smug smile stretched across her face. She wasn't nervous. If anything, she looked amused. Ethan exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. She has no idea what's coming. The meeting kicked off as usual, boring updates about maintenance schedules, neighborhood events, and budget reviews. Ethan waited patiently, letting Karen bask in her perceived control. Then, as expected, she made her move. Karen cleared her throat dramatically, drawing all eyes to her. "Before we move on," she said sweetly, "I'd like to address a concern that's been affecting the peace of our community." Ethan tensed. "Here it comes." Karen cast a sickeningly sympathetic glance in his direction. "It has come to my attention that certain individuals in our neighborhood have been engaging in, let's say, disruptive behavior." She sighed, placing a hand on her chest like she was personally wounded by it. "I think we all remember the unfortunate sprinkler incident that ruined our lovely HOA gathering." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen pressed on. "Now, I don't want to name names," her gaze lingered on Ethan just long enough to be obvious, "but this behavior is not in line with the values of Maplewood Estates. Furthermore, I've personally received complaints about aggression, property damage, and harassment from multiple residents. I believe it's in the best interest of this community to discuss potential disciplinary action." Ethan stood. The room went silent. "I'd like to address something more important," he said, voice steady, holding up the thick binder of evidence. Karen's eyes flickered to it, just for a second. Then, she laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Ethan," she said, shaking her head like she was speaking to a misbehaving child. "This isn't the time for." "I think it is," Ethan cut in, stepping forward. He placed the binder directly on the podium and flipped it open. "Because what I have here proves that you've been stealing from this community for years." The air in the room shifted. Karen's smile didn't fully disappear, but Ethan could see the rigidness creeping into her expression, the way her grip on her clipboard tightened just a little too much. "You're lying," she said, but there was a sharpness to her voice now. Ethan ignored her. "These are financial records, ones that show thousands of dollars in fraudulent transactions," he said, flipping the first page. "Luxury spa treatments, high-end shopping sprees, personal expenses, all paid for using HOA funds." A murmur spread through the room, a mix of shock, outrage, and dawning realization. Ethan didn't stop. "And then there's this," he continued, flipping to the most damning page. "A $5,000 legal fee, paid for using HOA money, money that should have gone toward community upkeep, not to settle a lawsuit against yourself. That did it." Gasps filled the room. Someone in the back muttered, "What the hell?" Karen's face paled, but she still fought back. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Anyone can forge documents. You expect us to believe?" "I do," Ethan said smoothly, flipping another page. "Because some of these expenses? They were approved by the HOA board." He looked up. "So, let's ask them." All eyes turned to the board members, specifically Greg, who had been silent the entire time. Greg, who had always quietly backed Karen. And for once, he didn't speak. He didn't even look at her. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, I reviewed some of these expenses last week, and they don't add up." Karen's head snapped toward him. "Greg." Her voice was low, warning. Greg shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact. Ethan pressed forward. "If this is all false, Karen, you won't mind if we have an independent financial audit, right?" Karen's composure cracked. Her eyes darted across the room, scanning for allies, but even her staunchest supporters were whispering now, eyes filled with doubt. She was losing them. "This is slander," she spat. "You're just trying to humiliate me." "I think it's embezzlement," Ethan corrected. "And I'm pretty sure the authorities might agree." The room erupted. Shouting, accusations, neighbors who had been bullied by Karen for years finally speaking up. Karen tried to regain control, raising her voice, demanding order, but no one was listening anymore. Then, the final blow. Greg, still looking deeply uncomfortable, stood up. "I move that we suspend Karen from her duties," he said, voice barely above a murmur. But it didn't matter. A resounding chorus of agreement followed. Karen's face contorted with fury as she whipped back toward Ethan, voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "You think this is over?" she seethed. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Ethan just grinned. "I think I know exactly who you are." The vote was cast. Karen was officially stripped of her position pending investigation. By the time the meeting ended, neighbors were openly discussing filing complaints against her, some even whispering about pressing charges. And the next morning, when Ethan stepped outside, there were no more violation notices on his door. For the first time in a long time, the air in the neighborhood felt lighter. Karen had lost. And he wasn't done yet. The days after Karen's downfall felt like a breath of fresh air. For the first time since moving into Maplewood Estates, Ethan didn't feel like he was living under a dictator's rule. The oppressive weight of Karen's constant meddling was gone, and the difference was almost immediate. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down, afraid of receiving fines for the most trivial infractions, now chatted openly in their yards. Parents let their kids play outside without the fear of Karen materializing to scold them for excessive noise. The neighborhood, for the first time in years, actually felt like a community. Karen, however, was not adjusting well to her fall from power. For the first few days after the meeting, she tried to act like nothing had changed, still parading around with her clipboard as if she were taking notes for future violations. But the difference was clear: people weren't listening to her anymore. Her most loyal followers, once so eager to enforce her rules, avoided eye contact and distanced themselves now that the truth had come out. Without her title and authority, Karen was just another bitter neighbor. And then, she disappeared. No one saw her at HOA meetings. Her once pristine yard, which she had often weaponized as the gold standard for the community, grew neglected, weeds sprouting between the cracks in her perfectly edged flower beds. The power she had clung to for years had been ripped away, and without it, she had nothing. Occasionally, Ethan would spot her peering through her window, watching the neighborhood that had once cowered under her rule, now thriving without her. The HOA, after Karen's removal, actually started working for the community instead of one woman's personal ego trip. Fines became fair, rules became reasonable, and for once, homeowners had a say in the decisions being made. To celebrate the change, the neighborhood threw a block party, this time held in the park instead of being forced onto someone's private property. As Ethan lounged in a folding chair, Buddy snoring at his feet, Maggie sat beside him, handing him a plate of barbecue. "Never thought I'd see the day," she said with a grin. Karen finally got what was coming to her. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. Took a sprinkler, a dog, and a deep dive into financial fraud to get here, but yeah, it was worth it. As he watched kids play, neighbors laugh, and the community finally free from Karen's iron grip, he knew one thing for certain: Maplewood Estates was finally home. But the question lingered. How many neighborhoods are still trapped under their own version of a Karen? Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.